Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you've ever looked at a problem in the world and thought, hey, I could build a business to fix that, then you are in the exact right place. Today, we're going to look really closely at the assessment of entrepreneurial opportunities. Basically, we're breaking down the exact science and strategy behind how successful founders take a raw, totally unproven concept and figure out if it actually has what it takes to survive out there in the real world.
So let me just ask you point blank. How do you know if your big idea is actually a good business? It's a question that stops millions of people right in their tracks every single year. You might have this brilliant concept sketched out on a napkin, but how do you objectively prove that strangers will actually open their wallets to pay for it? That is literally the multi-million-dollar question. And by the end of our time together today, you're going to have a concrete framework to answer it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today to guide us through. We're going to cover 1. The startup challenge. 2. Why do ventures fail? 3. Critical factors for success. 4. Traditional evaluation methods. 5. Modern venture methodologies. And finally, 6. Establishing venture legitimacy. All right, let's get into it.
First stop on our roadmap, Section 1, the Startup Challenge.
Take a look at this number. Over 400,000. That is the number of new firm startups created in the U.S. every single year since 2010. And get this, the U.S. Patent Office receives over 600,000 patent applications annually. To put that into perspective, that's literally more than the entire population of Wyoming submitting an idea every single year. What this brilliantly illustrates is that having an idea, it's actually incredibly common. The motivation to start is everywhere. But executing on that idea and turning it into a thriving business, now that is the real challenge.
To make this whole entrepreneurial journey a bit less intimidating, we can actually break it down into 3 concrete, chronological phases. Phase 1 is the pre-startup phase. This starts the exact moment you have the idea and ends the day your doors actually open for business. Phase 2 is the startup phase. This kicks off with your very first sales activity and lasts until your business is firmly established and has survived those immediate short-term threats. And finally, Phase 3 is post-startup, which lasts until the venture is either terminated or the founder is no longer in control. Breaking it down like this really helps founders focus on just surviving the phase they're currently in.
Moving right along. Section 2. Why do ventures fail?
So here's the thing. Business failure is rarely personal. It's usually a highly predictable misstep, not some kind of character flaw. Founders often trip over a lack of objective evaluation. They fall head over heels in love with their idea and completely fail to rigorously review it. Or maybe they have zero real insight into the market, totally misunderstanding the timing. Sometimes it's honestly just sheer ignorance of legal issues or an inadequate understanding of technical requirements that end up being wildly costly. It happens a lot.
What's really interesting about this is how neatly we can categorize these startup debts into 2 main buckets: product and market problems or financial problems. On the product and market side, you see things like poor timing, inappropriate distribution, or a really dangerous over-reliance on just one major customer. On the financial side, the usual suspects are initial undercapitalization, basically not raising enough money to survive early on, assuming debt way too early, or messing up relationships with venture capitalists. Recognizing these predictable patterns is absolutely the first step to avoiding them.
Okay, let's pivot to what actually works. Section 3, critical factors for success.
If you want your venture to survive and thrive, you've got to check these boxes. First, the uniqueness of the venture. Your product has to be meaningfully superior to the competition. Second, you need the appropriate capital investment for your specific industry. Third, product availability. You can't open your doors if your software is still full of bugs, right? No one wants to buy a digital paperweight. Fourth, you absolutely need to know who your customers are and how they buy. But honestly, arguably the most crucial factor here is the last one: an effective, collaborative entrepreneurial team. Having a team that continually adapts and reevaluates itself is so often the deciding factor in navigating those early, chaotic challenges.
So how do we actually evaluate if we have those critical factors? Well, historically, there's been a massive shift in how we approach this. On the old school side, we have traditional feasibility, which relies on heavy upfront planning and these static checklists before you ever even launch. And on the new school side, we have contemporary methods, which are iterative, super fast-paced, and wildly customer-driven.
Let's look at the old school first. Section 4, traditional evaluation methods.
Traditionally, entrepreneurs relied on 3 pretty heavy-duty methods. First, the profile analysis approach. This forces founders to investigate literally all financial, marketing, and HR variables before launching. Next, the feasibility criteria approach. This uses a really strict checklist of questions, like are margins high or does an initial customer even exist? Finally, the comprehensive feasibility approach. This demands massive deep dives into technical requirements and huge amounts of data gathering on economic trends. These methods are incredibly thorough for sure, but in today's lightning-fast market, they can honestly be just a bit too rigid.
So let's move to and see how this builds into something more dynamic. Section 5, Modern Venture Methodologies. This brilliantly illustrates the new school of thought, the design methodology. Instead of just writing some 50-page business plan, this approach takes an initial concept and shapes it through prototypes to get immediate feedback. It's like a giant puzzle you're constantly rearranging. The micro-iterations are those tiny tweaks you make within a stage, and macro-iterations are when you actually move back to a previous stage based on what you just learned. You're constantly testing for feasibility, desirability, and viability by getting out there and engaging with the market long before the official startup phase.
Alongside that design methodology is the massively popular lean startup approach, built around the build, measure, learn feedback loop. This is a super scientific approach to creating ventures. You build a product, you measure exactly how customers react to it using real data, and then you learn from those results to generate new ideas. The entire goal here is simply to reduce waste. You want to save time and effort by not building out a totally incorrect hypothesis. To make that whole loop work, you need to understand a really vital piece of business jargon, the MVP, or a minimum viable product. This is an actionable, accessible, and auditable early version of your product. Listen, an MVP is not your dream product with all the bells and whistles. It's simply the fastest, leanest way to test if your core idea actually holds up in the real world with real customers.
But what happens if your MVP tells you your brilliant original idea was, well, slightly wrong? You pivot. And let me be clear, a pivot is not a failure. Actually, scratch that, it's the exact opposite of a failure. It is a smart, structured course correction. It's a validated learning response derived directly from your build, measure, learn loop. It lets you test a brand new fundamental hypothesis without having to just scrap the entire company and start over. Which brings us to our final destination on the roadmap. Section 6, Establishing Venture Legitimacy.
Okay, so you've evaluated your idea, built an MVP, and you've pivoted. But there's one last huge hurdle. The crucial point is this. Because your venture is brand new, it inherently lacks trust. Legitimacy is your venture's ability to overcome that newness. If external audiences don't view your business as legitimate, you will never be able to acquire the crucial resources you need, like capital, top-tier talent, and strategic partnerships. You have to prove that you are real and reliable.
To establish that trust, you have to realize that different audiences literally speak different languages, which we call institutional logics. If you're trying to get a grant from the government, you need to use state logic, focusing on societal rules. But if you're pitching to venture capitalists, you've got to speak professional logic, focusing on scale and returns. Pitching on a crowdfunding platform? That requires community logic. As an entrepreneur, you have to adapt your message to match whoever you are asking for resources. Thankfully, there are concrete strategies you can use to proactively build this vital trust. You can use conformance, simply following the existing rules of your industry so you look reliable. You can use selection, intentionally placing your venture in a highly favorable environment. You can use identity mechanisms, utilizing professional symbols. Or you can use associative mechanisms, which is essentially borrowing trust by highlighting who you're tied to, like a prominent advisor or a really well-known supplier.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the startup phases and the predictable pitfalls of failure, all the way to MVP feedback loops and the strategies for building legitimacy. You now possess the exact concrete tools that successful founders use to reduce risk and objectively test their dreams in the real world. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, exciting thought. Now that you have the roadmap, how will you evaluate, build, and validate your own next big idea? The tools are in your hands, and I absolutely cannot wait to see what you build.